At RAF Halesworth in Suffolk, on the cold, damp morning of October 4, 1943, the mechanics were already at work before the sun cleared the hedgerows. 52 Republic P-47C Thunderbolts of the 56th Fighter Group sat in 2 long rows on the pierced steel planking, their olive-drab paint still beaded with dew. Each 7-ton monster was being fed 305 gallons of 100-octane from battered British tankers while armorers winched belts of .50 caliber into the 8 Browning M2s buried in the wings. The pilots of the 56th, average age 24, average combat experience 6 months, stood around in sheepskin jackets and Mae Wests, smoking Luckies down to the filters, watching the ritual they had come to both love and dread. Their group commander, 29-year-old Colonel Hubert "Hub" Zemke, quiet, precise, already balding, was walking the line, checking each aircraft himself. Everyone called him Zemp behind his back, never to his face. 6 months earlier the Luftwaffe had owned the sky over Europe. Today the 56th was going to try to take it back with an airplane most experts had already written off as a failure. Lock in, because this is the day the Thunderbolt stopped being a liability and started hunting the hunters. This is Wartime Zone. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was never meant to be elegant. It was a flying anvil. Empty weight 9,950 pounds, combat loaded closer to 14,500 pounds with full ammunition, bombs, or drop tanks. Wing loading was a brutal 42 pounds per square foot, higher than AB-17s. The fuselage looked like a beer barrel with wings grafted on, and the cockpit sat so far forward that pilots joked the propeller was in the next county. German ground crews who first saw one on a reconnaissance photo laughed out loud and christened it Der Dick, the fat one. Luftwaffe pilots shortened it to Der 7-Tonnen Milchkan, the 7-ton milk jug. American crews simply called it the jug, and the name stuck because nothing else described the way it hit the air: heavy, blunt, unstoppable. By contrast, Kurt Tank's Focke-Wulf 198.5 was a scalpel. Loaded weight barely 9,200 pounds, wing loading under 35 pounds per SQ feet, roll rate that could flick 360 degrees in the time it took an American pilot to swear. At 15,000 feet, a clean FW-190 could complete a level turn in 21 to 22 seconds. The P-47 needed 29 to 31. That 6 to 8 second difference was measured in coffins. In a classic Luftbury circle, the German pilot simply waited for the Thunderbolt to bleed energy, then slid inside the turn and hosed the jug's belly with 4 20mm cannon and 2 13mm machine guns. The first time the 56th Fighter Group tangled with JG-26 over France in the spring of 1943, the Germans flew literal circles around them. 5 Thunderbolts went down in under 4 minutes. 4 pilots dead on the spot, 1 bailed out and spent the rest of the war in Stalag Luft 3. Captain Robert S. Johnson limped home in a jug that looked like Swiss cheese. 187 20mm hits, countless 7.9mm, 1 cannon shell through the cockpit canopy that missed his head by inches. The airplane flew barely, but it had been humiliated. 8th Air Force Headquarters took one look at the loss ratios and started writing the P-47's obituary. 5 fighter groups were already scheduled to transition to the sleek, long-legged North American P-51 Mustang by the end of 1943. The Thunderbolt was too heavy, too short-range, too slow in the climb, and, most damning, it couldn't dogfight. Generals muttered that Republic Aviation had built a wonderful pursuit airplane 10 years too late. Bomber crews, watching their escorts get picked off like clay pigeons, began to call the jug the bomber-destroyer's best friend. Except one man refused to accept the verdict. Colonel Hubert Zemke, 29 years old, soft-spoken, already going bald under his crusher cap, had spent 1940 and 1941 at Wright Field as the Army Air Corps' primary test pilot for every prototype Thunderbolt that rolled off the Farmingdale line. He had wrung out the XP-47B at 80% power when the turbocharger still exploded regularly. He had dived the YP-47s past 550 miles per hour until the engineers begged him to ease off before the wings folded. He had flown the first production P-47CS with the clumsy Razorback fuselage and the later bubble canopy D models that finally gave a pilot some rearward vision. Zemke knew the airplane the way a violinist knows every grain of wood in his Stradivarius. And he knew one thing the combat reports never mentioned: the jug didn't need to turn. It needed to fall. The secret was hiding in plain sight. That gigantic Pratt & Whitney R2800-59 double wasp produced 2,000 honest horsepower on 100 octane and another 300 with war emergency water injection. The 4-bladed Curtiss electric propeller was 15 feet across and bit the air like a buzzsaw. The airframe had been designed from the start to withstand 9 GS in a dive, more than any German fighter dared attempt. Compressibility set in later and less violently than on the lighter Bf-109 or Fw-190. At 500 miles per hour indicated the ailerons were still crisp, the elevator still answered. German fighters began to lock up or buffet so badly the pilot had to ease back or risk tearing the wings off. Zemke saw the mathematics clearly. The Thunderbolt was not a knife fighter. It was a falcon. Altitude was height, height was speed, speed was life. So he threw the old fighter pilot manual into the North Sea and started over. No more weaving defensively beside the bombers at 160 knots indicated, bleeding energy every time a German feinted. No more desperate circling contests where the jug's weight became a death sentence. From now on the 56th would fight like a formation of dive bombers that happened to carry 8.50 calibers instead of 500-pounders. The new doctrine had 4 commandments, drilled into every pilot until they muttered them in their sleep. 1. Never sacrifice altitude for position. 2. Never slow down to turn with the enemy. 3. Attack only from above at the highest speed you can manage. 4. Fire 1 accurate burst, keep the speed, zoom, climb away, repeat. They called it Zemke's game, half joking, half reverent. The old hands resisted at first. Turning fights were what aces did. Sailor Malin, Gabi Gabreski, the whole mythology of the dogfight. Zemke didn't argue. He simply took them up in pairs and showed them. A single 70-degree dive from 30,000 feet to 20,000 converted into 480 miles per hour in 20 seconds. The pursuing Fw-190, lighter and cleaner, could maybe reach 460 before compressibility locked the elevator. The jug pulled away like the German was standing still. Zemke would then half roll, pull up into a hammerhead, and be back on top before the German pilot recovered from the dive. Lesson over. All summer of 1943 the 56th practiced until muscle memory replaced instinct. High-speed gunnery at 400 knots against drogue targets towed by weary A-20s. Dive bombing practice on splashes in the wash until every pilot could put a 500-pounder inside a 50-foot circle from 10,000 feet. Mock combats over the North Sea where the only permissible victory was a firing pass from above followed by a zoom climb escape. Anyone who slowed down and turned was declared dead on the spot, no appeals. Zemke flew every practice mission himself, leading from the front in his personal P-47C nicknamed Oregon Bell, later, Happy Warrior. By September the group was a single organism. 64 pilots who thought in 3 dimensions and treated altitude like gold bars. Meanwhile the bomber crews were dying in job lots. September 17th, Nantes, 8 B-17s gone. September 27th, Bremen, 26 fortresses lost, most to fighters before the P-47s even arrived. October opened with the promise of worse. The combined bomber offensive was bleeding out. Generals argued in smoky rooms at High Wycombe whether daylight bombing could continue at all. The Mustang was still months away in meaningful numbers. Someone had to hold the line. October 4, 1943. Mission: escort 240 B-17s to the shipyards and U-boat pens at Emden and Wilhelmshaven. Zemke briefed his pilots the night before in the Halesworth Ops hut, voice calm, pointer tapping the map. We will not fly alongside the bombers. We will fly 8,000 feet above them and 2 to 5 miles ahead. We are not sheepdogs. We are wolves. He positioned the 56th at 30,000 feet, directly over the Dutch coast penetration point. 8,000 feet of pure potential energy, ready to be cashed in for 500 miles per hour of closing speed. German Freya radar picked up the stream at 0930. JG-1 from Leeuwarden and JG-26 from Lille scrambled 73 fighters, 40 Fw-190s and 33 Bf-109gs. The German controllers expected the usual circus. P-47s lumbering along at bomber speed, easy to bounce from above. Instead they saw 52 blips orbiting high and fast, refusing to be drawn down. Major Klaus Mayatusch, leading the JG-26 contingent, climbed hard to 22,000 feet to set up the classic high-side attack. He never saw what hit him. At 0952 Zemke spotted the German gaggle assembling 15 miles ahead of the bombers, still climbing, noses pointed at the B-17s like hounds on a scent. He rolled the entire group inverted in perfect foreship fingers, pulled the nose down 70 degrees, and lit the afterburner that didn't exist, just the raw roar of 52 double wasps at full military power. The Thunderbolts accelerated like express trains. Airspeed indicators spun past 400, past 450, kissing 500 miles per hour in the thin air. The Germans never looked up. They were fixated on the bomber boxes below, already imagining the killing passes. Zenke's first burst caught an FW-190 at 480 miles per hour. 8.50 calibers firing 800 rounds per minute per gun ripped the Focke-Wulf apart from cockpit to tail. The German pilot never knew what killed him. 90 seconds later, the sky was a maelstrom of diving Thunderbolts and disintegrating German fighters. The 56th made one pass each, fired disciplined 4-second bursts, kept the speed, zoomed back upstairs. 4 minutes to regain 30,000 feet. 4 minutes later they dove again. The Germans scattered in panic, trying to turn, trying to dive away, trying anything. Physics didn't care. A lighter FW-190 following a jug into a 500 miles per hour dive either blacked out its pilot from G-load or folded its wings. One German pilot pushed over so violently his right wing buckled at the root and sheared clean off. The wreckage pinwheeled into the Zuider Z. By 1003 the Luftwaffe formation had ceased to exist as a fighting force. Not one German fighter reached the bombers. 0 B-17s lost to enemy aircraft that day. The 56th landed back at Halesworth with fuel to spare and less than 30% of their ammunition expended. Gun camera film confirmed 21 kills, 8 probables, 16 damaged. Intelligence officers checked and rechecked. Every claim stood. October 4, 1943, went into the books as the day the Thunderbolt stopped being a punchline and started writing its own legend. At 0952 hours on October 4, 1943, Colonel Hubert Zenke's eyes narrowed behind his tinted goggles. 15 miles ahead, through the hazy Dutch sky, he picked out the telltale specks. 73 German fighters climbing hard toward 18,000 feet, noses already pointed at the distant bomber boxes like wolves scenting blood. It was textbook Luftwaffe doctrine drilled into every Jagdflieger since Spain, Poland, France, the Battle of Britain: gain altitude advantage, roll in from 6 o'clock high, slash through the formation at maximum speed, extend east before the escorts can react. Major Klaus Mayatusch of JG-26 and Hauptmann George Peter Eder of JG-1 had executed the maneuver hundreds of times. They expected the usual lumbering Thunderbolts plodding along at 180 knots indicated, easy meat for a properly executed bounce. They never saw the wolves above them. Zenke's voice was ice calm on the R/T, Wolfpack execute execute execute. 52 olive drab Thunderbolts rolled inverted in perfect parade ground synchronization. 4 fingers of 4 ships each, noses dropping 70 degrees toward the earth. The massive double Wasps opened up to full military power, then war emergency water injection. The howl that rose across the sky was unlike anything the Germans had heard before. Not the snarling rasp of a Daimler-Benz or BMW radial, but a deep, freight train roar that vibrated in the chest even at 3 miles distance. Airspeed needles leapt past 400 miles per hour in the first 10 seconds, past 450 in 15, kissing 500 miles per hour before the altimeters had unwound 5,000 feet. The jugs were falling like express elevators with teeth. The German formation was still climbing, still focused downward on the B-17s, when the sky behind them simply detonated. Zenke's personal ship, Happy Warrior, closed the lead FW-190 so fast the German pilot had no time to flinch. 8 Browning M2s harmonized to converge at 250 yards, spoke as one. The burst lasted 4.2 seconds. 272 rounds of .50 caliber API left the muzzles at 2,900 feet per second. The Focke-Wulf's cockpit disintegrated in a red-orange flash. The airplane continued straight for another second, pilot already dead, then snap-rolled inverted and fell away trailing burning fuel. Zenke never touched his stick. He simply firewalled the throttle and kept the dive going, already looking for his next target. 90 seconds. 90 seconds was all the 56th needed to tear the heart out of the Luftwaffe interception. 51 more Thunderbolts followed their leader through the German formation like a steel tsunami. Each pilot fired one disciplined 4 to 5 second burst, then continued the dive, speed bleeding off only enough to keep the wings level and zoom climb back toward the sun. The combined firepower was apocalyptic. 416 machine guns firing 800 rounds per minute each, more than 68,000 rounds thrown into the air in the first minute alone. Tracers looked like glowing orange fire hoses. One FW-190 took a burst through the oil cooler and radiator. The pilot jettisoned his canopy and bailed out before the aircraft reached 15,000 feet. Another tried to follow a jug through the dive. At 510 miles per hour the lighter Focke-Wulf's wings folded upward like a book slamming shut. The wreckage pinwheeled into the Zuider Z in 3 separate pieces. Lieutenant Walter Cook, flying Zenke's wing, watched a veteran Staffel captain attempt a split-S escape. The German rolled inverted and pulled the nose straight down, trying to outrun the diving American. Cook stayed with him effortlessly. At 520 miles per hour indicated the Thunderbolt's controls were still crisp. The German's elevator began to lock. Cook closed to 200 yards, pressed the trigger, and walked his tracers from spinner to cockpit. The FW-190 snap rolled left, right wing sheared at the root, and tumbled end over end into a Dutch potato field. Cook never slowed below 480 miles per hour. He simply eased back on the stick and zoomed to 28,000 feet in one long, graceful arc, rejoining the formation as if he'd been out for a Sunday drive. The Germans scattered in every direction, radios screaming in panic. Some tried to turn and fight. The jugs refused to play. Some tried to dive away. The jugs were already faster. Some tried to climb back to altitude. The jugs were already there waiting. 4 minutes after the first attack, the 56th had reformed at 30,000 feet, cool, disciplined, hungry. For minutes later they dove again. And again. By 1003 the sky over the Dutch coast was empty except for burning wreckage drifting down like black snow. Not a single German fighter reached the bomber stream. 0 B-17s lost to enemy aircraft that day. The Thunderbolts landed at Halesworth between 1300 and 1400 hours, engines ticking as they cooled on the hardstands. Ground crews swarmed with ammunition counters. Average expenditure less than 30%. Gun camera cans were rushed to the photo lab. Intelligence officers worked through the night cross-checking claims against radar plots, bomber-gunner reports, and even Dutch underground sightings. 21 confirmed destroyed, 8 probables, 16 damaged. 0 American losses. 8th Air Force Headquarters, accustomed to grim arithmetic, refused to believe it until the film came back. October 4, 1943 was real. And it was only the beginning. October turned into a killing month. Bremen, October 8th. 6 more kills, 0 losses. Munster, October 10th. 9 confirmed, bombers untouched by fighters. The Luftwaffe began to dread the sight of the Wolf's Head insignia on those big radial engine fighters orbiting high and silent. Then came Black Thursday, October 14th, the second Schweinfurt raid. 300 German fighters rose to meet 291 B-17s in the largest air battle yet fought. The 56th claimed 16 kills, highest score of any escort group, but the sheer weight of numbers overwhelmed the defenses. 68 fortresses fell in flames, 680 crewmen dead or captured in one afternoon. The daylight bombing campaign teetered on the edge of cancellation. Some generals argued for suspending deep penetrations until the P-51 arrived in strength. Zemke's answer was a cold stare and another mission request. Weather cleared on October 20th. Target, Osnabrück Railway Yards. This time the Luftwaffe threw JG-26 and elements of JG-3 into the air, led by one of their finest, Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Wutt's Galland, 55 victories, younger brother of General der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland. Galland positioned his 70 fighters perfectly, high, slightly behind, and closing fast for the classic bounce. Zemke watched them through binoculars from 32,000 feet, 2,000 feet higher than the Germans believed possible for a P-47. He waited until Galland's formation committed, then rolled the entire group into the dive. The attack came from dead astern and 2,000 feet above at 470 miles per hour. Galland's FW-190 took the first burst in the engine and cockpit. The aircraft flipped inverted and spun straight into the ground west of Münster, no parachute. 17 German fighters fell in 7 minutes. The rest fled east, radios filled with frantic warnings about Die Rollenden Donnerkiel, the rolling thunder wedges. The bombers completed their run unmolested by fighters. Flak got 3, but the Luftwaffe interception had been annihilated before it began. By the end of October the 56th had flown 9 maximum effort missions and destroyed 39 German aircraft confirmed, with 0 losses in 5 of those missions. Luftwaffe intelligence officers pored over gun camera film in stunned silence. The Americans had done the impossible. They had taken the heavy, clumsy Thunderbolt and turned it into the most dangerous fighter in the European sky. And they had done it not by making the airplane turn better, but by refusing to turn at all. By the end of October 1943 the numbers were undeniable. 9 major missions in 31 days. 39 confirmed Luftwaffe aircraft destroyed, another dozen probables, and not a single 56th pilot lost in 5 of those engagements. No other fighter group in 8th Air Force came close. The Wolfpack had gone from punchline to predator in 4 weeks. At Luftwaffe headquarters in Berlin and at fighter bases from Leeuwarden to Vienna, intelligence officers pinned fresh gun camera stills to corkboards and stared in silence. The photos showed FW-190s and BF-109s disintegrating from perfectly placed .50 caliber bursts delivered at 480 to 520 miles per hour from dead astern. German pilots who survived radioed the same frantic description. Gross Amerikanische Jäger fallen aus der Sonne wie Stein, dann sind es weg. Big American fighters fall from the sun like stones, then they are gone. Staff officers coined a new term that quickly spread across every Jeschwader: the Amerikanische Rollattack, the American rolling attack. They had no doctrine to counter it. November opened with emergency conferences. Adolf Galland, General der Jagdflieger, flew from Berlin to Diehl to Lille to Rhein, chain-smoking as he watched the same film reels again and again. Erich Hartmann, already with over 100 victories on the Eastern Front, was brought west for consultation. Every expert agreed on the problem. The Americans were no longer escorting bombers, they were hunting fighters. Traditional intercept tactics, gain altitude, bounce the bombers, extend away, were suicide when the escorts held 8,000 to 10,000 feet advantage and refused to be drawn down. The Jagdwaffe tried everything. Split their formations into 3 altitude blocks. Sent small 4-plane swarm weaving through cloud layers. Ordered sudden 180-degree reversals the moment American fighters were sighted. Nothing worked. Zemke simply adjusted. He split the 56th into 3 vertically staggered squadrons, 30,000, 28,000 and 26,000 feet, each covering the other's blind spots. When the Germans came high, the top squadron dove. When they came low, the bottom squadron dove. When they tried the middle, both ends of the trap closed at once. Discipline was absolute. No one broke formation, no one chased, no one slowed down. November 5th, Munster raid. JG-3 and JG-26 threw 60 fighters at the bombers in 3 separate waves. The 56th intercepted all 3 before they closed to 5 miles. 14 confirmed kills, 0 bombers lost to fighters. Flak claimed 2 B-17s, the Luftwaffe got none. By late November, German controllers were openly rerouting formations the moment the 56th's distinctive wolfhead call signs appeared on the Y-service plots. Achtung! Wolfpack im Raum became the most feared transmission on the Jagdwaffe net. December 8, 1943, Kings Cliff Airfield. A freezing Nissen hut packed with every P-47 group commander in 8th Air Force. Zemke stood at a blackboard for 4 straight hours, chalk dust on his sleeves, voice flat and relentless. Your airplane cannot outturn a 109 or a 190. Accept it. Stop trying. Altitude is money, spend it wisely. Convert height to speed, speed to separation, separation to life. He drew dive angles, zoom climb curves, energy equations until the board looked like a physics exam. Some old-school commanders grumbled, dogfighting was glory, this was mathematics. Don Blakesley of the 4th Fighter Group, already slated for P-51s in January, leaned back and asked the question everyone was thinking. Will this crap work in a Mustang? Zemke didn't smile. It works in anything with wings and power, Colonel. The jug just needs it more than most. The proof came in February 1944, big week. 4 6 days 8th and 15th Air Forces threw 1,000 bombers a day at the heart of German aircraft production. The 56th flew every single mission with new 150-gallon flat Lockheed drop tanks that pushed combat radius from 230 to 425 miles. Berlin was now inside the envelope. Engineers at Republic and 8th Air Force had refined the procedure. Take off heavy, climb over England burning external fuel first, cross the enemy coast light and ready to fight. On March 6 the impossible became routine. 730 heavy bombers and 796 fighters struck Berlin itself. The 56th Fighter Group crossed the city limits at 33,000 feet, the first American fighters ever over the Reich capital. They fought from the stratosphere down to the rooftops, claimed 18 kills, lost 2 pilots, 1 evaded, 1 captured. Not one B-17 or B-24 fell to fighters over the target itself. Berlin's 2,000 flak guns turned the sky black with bursts, but the Luftwaffe fighter defense was shattered before the bomb run even began. 3 months later the Wolfpack was at Boxted, Essex, perfectly positioned for the invasion nobody was supposed to know about yet. June 6, 1944, D-Day. The 56th launched at 0430 into a dawn still black with night. 51 Thunderbolts swept the Normandy coast ahead of the first wave. Luftwaffe reaction was immediate but already too late. Most German fighters had been pulled back from forward fields days earlier. The 56th found them anyway, scrambling from airstrips near Cannes and Evreux, heavy with fuel, slow, vulnerable. Zenke's pilots caught 9 FW-190s and BF-109s literally on the runway or in the takeoff roll. Strafing passes with 8 Brownings and armor-piercing incendiary turned concrete into funeral pyres. Another dozen were shot down wheels up at 200 feet. Not a single German fighter reached the invasion beaches in the 56th sector all day. By sunset the group had flown 97 individual sorties, claimed 23 enemy aircraft, 15 on the ground, and lost none. The summer became a hunter's paradise. With the Luftwaffe forced into low-level defensive fighting, the Jug's ruggedness and firepower turned it into the deadliest ground attack aircraft in Europe. Trains, trucks, staff cars, horse-drawn supply columns, anything that moved on the roads behind Normandy was fair game. In the Falaise pocket alone the 56th destroyed over 400 vehicles in a single week. 8.50 calibers firing API could saw a locomotive in half or turn a Panther tank into a flaming coffin if you hit the engine deck just right. Pilots came home with canopies spattered in oil and blood, grinning like wolves after a successful hunt. From the Dutch coast in October 1943 to the Elbe River in April 1945, the 56th Fighter Group never changed aircraft, never changed leaders, until Zenke rotated out in August 1944, and never lost the edge he had given them. They ended the war with 677.5 enemy aircraft destroyed in the air, the highest score of any American fighter group in any theater, and another 347 on the ground. 39 aces. And they did it all with an airplane that, on paper, couldn't dogfight its way out of a wet paper bag. On August 12, 1944, Colonel Hubert Hub Zenke climbed out of his P-47D-25 Happy Warrior at Boxted for the last time as commander of the 56th Fighter Group. 8th Air Force had a new job for him: take over the floundering 479th Fighter Group, a P-38 outfit that was bleeding pilots and morale. Zenke hated leaving the Wolfpack, but orders were orders. He shook hands with every squadron commander, climbed into a C-47 and flew west. The group he left behind had already become legend. Lieutenant Colonel David C. Schilling stepped into the void without ceremony. 26 years old, lean as a greyhound, with a crooked grin and a voice like gravel, Schilling had been with the 56th since January 1943. He knew every paragraph of Zenke's playbook by heart and had helped write half of it. Under his command the tempo never slackened. The Wolfpack kept hunting. Between August 1944 and V-Day they flew another 250 missions. They supported the airborne drops during Market Garden, strafed the Siegfried Line during the Hurtgen Forest slaughter, covered the bridges during the Battle of the Bulge when the Luftwaffe made its last desperate gasp, and escorted the final 1,000-bomber raids that turned German cities into moonscapes. When the ground war rolled across the Rhine in March 1945, the 56th was overhead, 8 Brownings chewing up anything that moved on the roads below. The final tally when the Air Force historians closed the books was staggering: 447 combat missions, 19,391 individual sorties, 64,320 hours flown in combat, 677.5 enemy aircraft destroyed in the air, 347 more on the ground, 39 pilots who made ace 5 or more kills, 0 aircraft types flown from first mission to last. No other American fighter group, Army, Navy, or Marine, in any theater came close. The 4th Fighter Group with its glamorous Mustangs finished second with 583 air victories. The 56th beat them by almost 100 kills while flying the airplane everyone had written off 2 years earlier. The names still ring like bugle calls. Francis Gabby Gabreski, 28 victories, shot down on his 166th mission, escaped captivity. Robertus Johnson, 27. David Schilling, 22.5. Walker Bud Mahurin, 20 3/4. Fred Christensen, Jerry Johnson, Joe Powers, Les Smith. The list goes on until 39 men had crossed the magic threshold of 5 kills. And every one of them learned the same lesson: never turn with the enemy, never get slow, never fight his fight. Hubert Zenke never saw the final victory. On October 30, 1944, flying a P-51D with the 479th over Germany, he hit violent turbulence at 18,000 feet. The Mustang's wings folded like cardboard. He bailed out, evaded for 3 days and was finally captured near Hanover. He spent the rest of the war as senior Allied officer at Stalag Luft I on the Baltic coast, responsible for 9,000 prisoners. When the Russians liberated the camp in May 1945, Zenke walked out a full colonel at 31 years old. He stayed in the Air Force until 1966, retiring to California with a chest full of medals but no star on his shoulder. The official reason was reduction in force. The unofficial reason, whispered in officers' clubs, was simpler. Zemke never learned when to keep his mouth shut around generals who preferred yes men to innovators. It didn't matter. His ideas were already immortal. In the 1950s, F-86 Sabre pilots over MiG Alley used the same vertical tactics. In the 1960s and 70s, F-4 Phantom crews over Hanoi called it boom and zoom, and owed their lives to a playbook written above the Dutch coast in 1943. Even today, an F-16 instructor at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona can trace a direct line from the 56th Fighter Group's briefing room at Halesworth to the modern energy management syllabus. The mathematics never changed. Altitude is potential energy, speed is life, and the fighter that dictates the terms of engagement usually dictates who goes home. The jug that couldn't dogfight became the most successful American fighter in the European theater, not because Republic suddenly built a better airframe, but because one quiet, balding colonel from Missoula, Montana, looked at the same airplane everyone else saw and asked a different question. What if we stop trying to make it turn, and start teaching it to fall? This is the story of the 56th Fighter Group, the Wolf Pack, and the man who taught 7 tons of aluminum, gasoline, and rage how to hunt like a falcon. They took the airplane the brass wanted to scrap and used it to rip the heart out of the Luftwaffe, one perfectly timed 500 miles per hour diving attack at a time. Gabreski, Johnson, Schilling, Mahurin, and all the rest didn't win because they had the fastest or most agile mount. They won because they understood their mount better than the enemy understood his. Because sometimes victory doesn't come from having the best machine. It comes from having the best mind in the cockpit. We owe them more than silence. From that cold October morning in 1943 to the final mission over Germany in April 1945, the 56th Fighter Group, the Wolf Pack, flew the same airplane every single day and destroyed more Luftwaffe fighters than any other American unit in any theater. 677.5 in the air, hundreds more on the ground, 39 aces, 0 excuses. They took the airplane the experts wanted to scrap and used it to escort bombers to Berlin, clear the skies over Normandy, and break the back of the Jagdwaffe, not because the Thunderbolt suddenly learned how to dogfight, but because Hub Zemke and his pilots rewrote the rules of aerial combat with altitude, speed, discipline, and pure cold mathematics. The jug didn't change. The war did. And because it did, daylight bombing worked, D-Day succeeded, and the road to victory stayed open. These men turned a supposed failure into the most successful fighter group in the European theater, and they did it one perfectly timed diving attack at a time. If this story of brains, guts, and 7 tons of righteous thunder fired you up the way it still fires us up, do 3 quick things right now. Smash that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to push this story to more people who need to hear it. Hit subscribe and ring the bell. We drop these deep cut, no BS war stories every single week, and you don't want to miss the next one. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Texas, Germany, Australia, Japan. Doesn't matter. The Wolfpack's legacy belongs to all of us. The 56th is still out there today, training F-16 pilots at Luke Air Force Base, still wearing the wolf's head, still carrying the same spirit. Let's make sure the world never forgets what they did with an airplane nobody else believed in. Thank you for locking in with us. We'll see you in the next fight. This is Wartime Zone.